Welcome to the Convergence Podcast. I'm your host, Ashok Shivanan.
If you really want, things to go the way that you want them to go, you got to build that right culture, get people bought into it, because that's what's going to sustain and execute your strategy. Because without the right culture, your strategy will fail.
On this show, we'll deconstruct the best practices, principles, and the underlying philosophies behind the most engaged product teams who ship the most successful products. This is what teams are made of. Welcome back, folks. On this episode, I get to speak with Earl Newsome, Chief Information Officer at Cummins, one of the world's leading manufacturers and distributors of engines, filtration systems, and power generation products. We get to hear about Earl's journey from a self-proclaimed geek who built robots in his parents' house to serving on the armed forces and playing D1 college football, and how that shaped his leadership style as a chief information officer. Earl has played CIO and CTO roles at other massive companies like Praxair, TE Connectivity, and Estee Lauder, and talks about the importance of believing in oneself and removing self-imposed limits. We talk about Earl's principles of taking care of his employees, the concept of a 360-degree leadership, and how he earns trust quickly with his team when he's in a new role through active listening and by seeking out dissenting opinions from his team. Earl highlights the role of performance, image, and exposure in building a personal brand with intentionality, and offers insights as well in building a world-class strategy on a Fortune 500 company as a technologist. We get to hear Earl's insights on the power of artificial intelligence and generative AI in the industrial sector, and also the importance of DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, when building a world-class technology organization, and how that's also led to him serving on the board of TechPact to bridge the race and gender gaps amongst technologists. Earl also shares some of his tips and tricks around great storytelling and how the impact of small actions can have really positive change. I got to learn a lot from Earl, and if you're an aspiring C-suite technologist, I have a strong hunch that you will too. Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you have any other questions for Earl. Earl, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashok. I mean, I think this is fantastic. I look forward to the dialogue. I look forward to catching up with you as well. And we can
For sure. Likewise.
About why we didn't kick that damn field goal. But
that's a big debate that I think we should get to for sure. But maybe let's peel things back just a little bit first and talk about your journey a little bit. You've played CIO, CTO roles. And so talk to us about where that all got started and how you arrived at this path of wanting to be a C-level.
Oh, thank you very much for the question. I'll start kind of with probably a strange story. I started out, as a little kid, I was playing with, computers and Radio Shack. And I mean, some of the readers or people who are in this session probably don't even know what Radio Shack is. But, I used to love to kind of build things, these Radio Shack kits. And I'll start off with this, is that I was born in Stamford, Connecticut. My brother, 11 months younger than me, was born in Norwalk, Connecticut. My brother, 11 months younger than him, was born in Junction City, Kansas. And so we moved around quite a bit. And so I often say I moved 26 times, and I stopped counting after that. And during those moves, when we get the boxes and, pack and unpack, and I would unpack the boxes and, whatever the new location was, I would turn those boxes into robots. So I would take my Erector set, my Radio Shack gear and stuff like that, and I would actually create these little robots, out of the cardboard boxes, and they'd have heads and that kind of stuff, and they'd turn, and sometimes they'd have lights, and I pull things in and start to create these robots. And so my early days was always tinkering with technology and tinkering with technology and digital as it, intersected with the physical space, and hence a robot, right? And that was kind of where I all got started. And my mom, and she's now passed, but she would say that I said I was going to be the CIO of a Fortune, 500 company, when I grew up. And that was when I was 5 years old. Now, I want to call BS on that because I'm not sure I knew what a Fortune 500 was or what a CIO was, but bless her heart, that's what she said I would say. And so I had this energy in me, from building those robots and driving and trying to create, technological solutions, to physical opportunities ever since the beginning. And so that was kind of how I grew up and how I learned. And my first CIO job, I will say I will credit Larry Griffiths. I was working for a company and I was the technology lead for ERP implementation. And he was the leader of one of our divisions and happened to also be the temporary CIO. And so as he was leading this division of the company, the CEO came and told him, you need to find somebody to run IT because it's a bit of a distraction for you. And I need you to be very, very focused on running our division. As a result of that, and I was in the room when I got asked, and Larry looked at me and said, you're one of my, I was a consultant at the time and leading this ERP implementation. And he said, well, can you help me find a CIO? I said, sure, I can go do that. And so I went home and I started thinking about looking through my Rolodex and thinking, okay, who can I introduce? And, probably, I don't know, sometime during that night, I said, wait a minute, I can do this job. And so I got back in the morning. I said, Larry, would you be interested in me being the CIO? And he said, I didn't think you would do that. You thought you're having too much fun being a consultant, but absolutely you could. And that was like at 8 o'clock in the morning. And he said, well, let's go up and talk to the CEO. So I walked upstairs and with him and talked to the CEO. And the CEO said, he knew me from this work we were doing. And he said, would you like to do this? And I said, sure, I would do it. And that afternoon I got an offer. So, literally in one day and one day, that's how it happened. And so I often tell people, it's like, this idea about luck and preparation, meeting opportunity, and people think that's a cliche, but that really was it. It really was my preparation of, with everything I did from working with those robots and in the beginning, to working on TRS-80s in the early, years and in college and high school, continuing to pursue my dream that when I had the opportunity, in that moment, I took a chance on me and they took it, and often people say, taking chances, right? It's really about you taking a chance on you and them taking a chance on themselves. Nobody's taking a chance on anybody else. It's really all about how much do you believe you can get done? How much do they believe that they can, support you? And when those two things come together, you can do amazing things. And so that's how I got started.
So I think you touched on a really key point. And before I get into the more leadership and technical pieces, there's maybe a personal part of this journey that I want to ask you about. We oftentimes, maybe it's an imposter syndrome, will look at the Rolodex, and then you had that moment where you said, maybe I want to do this. And I know I've been guilty of it. There's maybe people that work on your team or around you, you're familiar with, that second guess themselves, right? You could have woken up the next morning and said, he would never be into it. Let me go find the Rolodex. But something inside you said, hey, it might be good enough for this. Let me try it. And so is that true? What was that journey like? How did you come to bet on yourself in this case?
I love this concept called the 6-word story. And the 6-word story was made famous by Ernest Hemingway. And when somebody challenged him to write a story in 6 words, and his story was for sale, baby shoes never worn. So think about that. In 6 words, I can say something really powerful, right? I can, cause you to ask more questions. I can be insightful. I can tell you a complete story. I can do a lot of stuff in a very few amount of words. In fact, it's, Einstein is credited for saying, I could be more brief if you give me more time. Right. And so the idea is you can really create something very powerful in a short phrase. And my favorite 6-word story is this, is that you're the story that you tell yourself. right? And that is, that story can either limit you or unlimit you. And so, and my mom would say, and I credit for this to say, really, don't put limits on yourself, right? Because as soon as you do that, you're being your own, you're creating your own story, and you're going to create your own reality, right? Your own Pygmalion. Pygmalion is the guy who believed that stone could be life, right? So if you're your own Pygmalion, right? So whatever story you have in your head is going to limit you. And so this idea about changing your personal narrative can unleash you, right? And so if you're telling yourself a story that I can't be this, like if I'd have told myself a story that says, I don't think I could do this role, that role's not right for me, then I'll never ask, right? And so think about whatever story that you're telling yourself and change that story so that you can unlimit your potential. And so I think it comes from, and I've been thinking about this for a while about where does this idea about there's no limits come from? And I think about my grandfather, and he was, he was, a military guy, and we lived in El Paso, and we started off in the barrio, right? And so we went from the barrio across I-10 to the neighborhood, and my grandmother would send him out to go, go get food or something like that. And what he would do is he would come back with multiple of everything. He would come back with, double the amount of milk. We'd have 4 gallons of milk. We'd have, a bunch of sausages and all this other stuff he'd get from the commissary. And my grandma would look at him, why are you doing that? And he would say, we need to live a life of abundance. There are no limits. And we went from austerity and poverty to, him filling me with the vision that we can live an abundant life and that there are no limits, right? And so I think, from our meager beginnings to this life of abundance, I think if you believe in yourself and in your abundant life, you can live a life of abundance without any limits. And so that's the story I tell myself. There are no limits. There's no limits to kind of how we look. There's no limits to the people we love. There's no limits to the things that we can do or accomplish. There's no limits to our dreams. You're like, oh, Master P, no limits, right? So I'm a no limit soldier, right? And so there are no limits. And the only limit that exists is the one that you put on yourself. So take those away and then reach for the stars.
I love that so much. And, we end up self-fulfilling that story we tell ourselves about ourselves a lot. And I've learned that only more recently. I wish I had run into you sooner.
I wish I had learned.
You mentioned your grandfather. Yeah, fair enough.
This is from years of living. I've got here. So, I didn't start out with this thing, but you're right. We learned, and now I'm happy to pass it on. In fact, it was interesting that you mentioned that, because I was at a resort, and the concierge, I was going to go pick up my car, and he asked me a very similar question, and he went to go get the car, and he came back. He said, sir, can I ask you a question? I said, first of all, don't call me sir. My name is Earl. You can. And he said, what advice would you give your 23-year-old self? And I told him that story, and that you're the story that you tell yourself. And I didn't have that advice when I was 23. So for our younger listeners, and really, really, and our older ones, pass it on. You're the story that you tell yourself, and that can really free your mind.
Fostering an engaged product organization and aligning them with the principles around lean, human-centered design, and agile will more than likely lead to successful business outcomes for your organization. But getting started or getting unblocked can be hard. This podcast is brought to you by the player coaches over at Integral. They help ambitious companies like you build amazing product teams and ship products in artificial intelligence, cloud, web, and mobile. Listeners to the podcast can head on over to integral.io/convergence and get a free product success lab. During this session, the Integral team will facilitate a problem-solving exercise that gives you clarity and confidence to solve a product, design, or engineering problem. That's integral.io/convergence. Now, back to the show. You mentioned a beautiful story about your grandfather. Thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned that he served in the armed forces, and I know that you did that as well. So how did that come around, and what did you study? Tell us about your football career as well while you're there.
I was living in Phoenix, Arizona. I'll never forget this. And that my mom, she was the equal opportunity director for the city of Phoenix. As I was considering, I was a geek. Had my a pure geek. Probably wore hush puppies. My corduroys didn't quite cover my shoes. That kind of stuff, right? and I played football in high school. But so I was a geek football player. It was interesting. And so then as I was choosing colleges, I wanted to go to Cal Polytech because I was going to be a geek. I wanted to start my own IT company one day. And so I said, I'm going to go do this geek thing, right? And my grandfather came to me and he said, have you considered West Point? I'm like, West Point? I don't even know what that is, right? And he said, no, you should really consider it. And so out of El Paso, my grandfather asked me, would I consider it? And I had such regard for him. I said, sure, I would. And then, my mom kind of worked with the city to get me the appointments that I need. So you had to get an appointment from, your senators and your representative. You have to get one. Each of them get like 10, I think, to get you to West Point. And I got both Dee Consini and Goldwater, who gave me an appointment. So Senator Goldwater, Republican from Arizona, gave me an appointment to go to West Point. And so from my grandfather's, support and guidance and out of the city of El Paso, I went to West Point with I think there were 13 of us total that ended up going to West Point. And I went really on the behest of my grandfather. And I didn't know what I was getting into. And so when I got into West Point, you get there your first day and it's called our day. And, and the famous words are, you look to your left, to your right, one of you won't be here, when we graduate. And that was true. It was like Newsome, New Miller, and New Meyer. I can't remember exactly our names, but one of us wasn't there. And there was like 1,500 that joined and 900 that graduated. From that process of joining and going to West Point, and that was really the fulfillment of two things. I went there and I played football for a couple of years, and I played track. I was a hammer thrower. I didn't throw the hammer before, and I was a hammer thrower, and I went to the NCAA's twice. Studied independent study in computers, so I was a geek. And you wanted to be a sports player because at West Point, they have this thing called a fourth class system where they haze you and all that kind of stuff, right? But if you're in sports, if you're a varsity athlete, you don't have to be, you only have to be hazed. You don't have to go to the lunch and the afternoon stuff. You just only have to do the morning stuff. So you do the morning stuff and you sit on what we call core squad tables, which is, the varsity athletics tables, and they don't haze you there. So I was a little bit self-serving. I didn't want to get hazed all that much. And I love sports and I love computers. And so, sports got me out of hazing. Then going to computers got me, into doing technology work for the military and doing some, individual study work and things like that. And then from there, I got into the military. Worked for, I think it was the Signal Corps at the time, which is where computers in the Army were. Now, that's a misnomer because really it was communication. So Mobile for the Army is what the Signal Corps is. And so I did a lot of work in putting in telephones and pulling cable than I did writing code, but it was what was useful. And I learned a lot through it. And in my military career, I'll tell you, I got two really big takeaways from there. One of them is what I call taking care of soldiers, right? And I do that today, and I think about it, this idea about taking care of employees and taking care of soldiers. And the way that you take care of soldiers, right, is that you make sure that they're equipped well, practiced well, and trained well. Because soldiers who are equipped well, practiced well, and trained well tend to come back from battle unharmed. And that's really the job of a leader, is to make those decisions well, take care of your soldiers and bring as many back home as you possibly can. Because that's really what good leadership is about training them, equipping them, and practicing them such that they have a high likelihood of coming home. And that's what I really learned from the military. And I learned to apply that in civilian life as well. And that we know that people redeploy on projects, if they're trained well, equipped well, and practice well. I'm sure, Ashok, you know this as well, that if you have those people with the right tools, the right training, and the right practice in using those tools, when you deploy them onto a project or they will be successful and they will come back from that project unharmed, And so that's what we want. Right. And that to me is the real goal of a leader, is to ensure that people that you put in your employ come back unharmed. We do that in manufacturing. We do that in technology. We just need to think about it all the time, because those people are charged to us, right, to make sure that they do their work as effectively and they come back unharmed, right? And, and the way that you do that is make sure they have the right equipment, the right training, and the right practice on using that equipment, such that when, the proverbial stuff hits the fan, they're ready. Because it will, and so that's lesson number one. Is that lesson number two is what I call 360-degree leadership. And 360-degree leadership is about this. It's about, in the military construct, it's about strategic competence, tactical competence, and technical competence, right? Strategic competence is knowing which hill to attack, right? You want to be able to use your soldiers in the right way to attack the right objective, right? Because if you send them the wrong way, then that's your responsibility. The next thing is this tactical competence of knowing how to attack that hill safely, right? What tactics should we use? How should we approach attacking this hill such that we bring the majority of our soldiers home? And then lastly, and this to me is the most important thing, is technical competence. And this idea is rolling up your sleeves and helping along the way. You've got to be, the leader who sits back, the officer who sits back, and sends their soldiers into harm's way without going with them, is the one who doesn't make it, right? And so that is the key to being an effective soldier and an effective leader, is this notion of strategic, tactical, and technical competence. And I think you need to use that in business, right? And so in business, I want you to know which hill to go, what objective are we going to go at. You get to make that decision, right? Then you work with your team to decide how you're going to tackle that objective. And then I need you to get in there and get it done with them, right? And so that is what to me is effective leadership is all about. And I learned that through the military in this 360-degree leadership. And so that to me is what's important.
I love both of those lessons. I want to go a little bit deeper on the second one, especially the point that you mentioned about getting in there and getting your hands dirty with the team. I find that this is something that some executives that I come across require a little bit of coaching or nudging to do, maybe because they don't write as much code, or they're not as familiar of the modernity of the code that's being written today. And there's just some level of vulnerability maybe, or some other factor where they don't want to feel exposed around the team, or they feel like they're too far removed from it. And I'm curious, what advice do you have for those folks, or any stories you have about getting in there, rolling up your sleeves, and how it's different from other executives you worked alongside?
I think that's a great question. And, there's going to be times where you're not going to know because the syntax is different, right? But that's really just a syntax issue. It's not a logic issue, right? And so what you can do is bring your logic to bear, and your insights to bear on any particular, challenge, regardless of the language, right? And so, there was, as I think about that, this idea about how can we learn and apply, what we've seen and intuit and apply it to somewhere else. And so I think that's this logic idea, and that you should be able to see patterns, right? And so what we're bringing, to bear as executives is our ability to see patterns in our experience. So it's experience and patterns, right? You bring those two things together to whatever problem is, whether they're talking about a Python problem, a C++, a COBOL, a Pascal. Now I was a Pascal programmer, a UCSD, COBOL programmer, and those kinds of things. Got into C# a little bit, but today it's Python and Databricks and whatever it is and low code kind of things. But what you can do is you can bring your ability to see patterns, right? And so don't be shy about your inability to code in Python. I can't code in Python and I don't intend to. But the idea is I can talk to somebody who's a Python programmer and use my experience and patterns to have a discussion with them about how to do it. Here's what I need this code to do. Here's how to talk to customers. Here's how to talk to end users. You use your practice of ethnography, and I love that concept of walking around and seeing what people do, and applying human insights to whatever the technology is, because we need both. So we need your expertise, your ethnography to walk around and see what your developers are doing, what they're creating, and then help them see through your experience and your ability to recognize patterns to make it even better. That's how you get your hands dirty. You get your hands dirty with what you can do. There was another story I'll tell you. There's this guy, I think it was Ken, from Saatchi & Saatchi. He was the CEO of Saatchi & Saatchi. And I remember, sitting in a room with him, and he was talking about, how he runs his business. And Saatchi & Saatchi is, one of the New York, media firms. And what he said was, and this was liberating to me, his idea is that do what you can do and hire people to do what you can't, and know the difference. That's it. So as a leader, do what you can do and hire people to do what you can't. And so that's what I look for. That's, when I think about who I bring onto my team are people who can do stuff I can't do. And I'm happy with that, right? And because that's a really powerful, that's the power of diversity, quite frankly, is this idea about bringing in these different perspectives to do what you can't do, right? Because when they bring in their perspectives, they do what you can't do. The combination of what they can't do and what you can't do and what they can do and what you can't do, the combination of all that leads to amazing outcomes. That's how we win. And that's how we win with the power of difference.
And many, many powerful concepts there. I love the going down to the line, go and see. I think it's called Genchi Gampotsu from lean manufacturing, right? And you've played a leadership role. You've come in as the CIO at a number of different companies. And I think in order for you to see the patterns, you need to have access to good data. Oftentimes, that data resides within your direct reports. And the amount of data you get in order to make those patterns, I would have a hunch, is a function of how much trust you're able to earn from them. And you probably need to do that early in order to show an impact early. So when you go into a new role, or for a newly hired CIO or a CTO, what's some advice to quickly earn trust from the team so you can serve them best and see those patterns?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think you have to come up with your 100-day plan, right? Whatever it is, right? But I break down the 100-day plan kind of in 4 areas, right? Number one is, kind of know the industry, right? And this idea, whatever industry that you're in, especially if you come from another industry and you're moving into a new industry, invest in knowing that industry, and immerse yourself in it, right? That means do the go and sees, the Gemba walks and these other things, and go see customers, go see plants, go see if sales is retail, whatever it is, immerse yourself in that industry so that you start to build the industry acumen, because that will earn you some trust. Being vulnerable and going in and learning, say, I don't know, show me. I think that is fantastic. Number 2 is really start to build and define your brand. Understand what matters. And make sure that your brand and the brand that you bring to the table, and you tweak it however you need to meet the needs of the organization that you're at. But, make sure that you understand your brand and work feverishly, to build the right brand for yourself and the company. Number three is understanding the hot topics, right? I mean, there are hot topics. There are always hot topics, right? So understand what those hot topics are. Talk to your customers, talk to your people, talk to the leaders around you, talk to your senior leaders, and understand what those hot topics are. And you really kind of focus on what those might be. And whatever that is, that needs to be, part of your agenda for your first year at your role, is addressing those hot topics. And I think, the last thing I would say is, if you really kind of know your brand, you really understand those hot topics, you understand the industry, you can begin to set the strategy for your organization. And they're going to be looking for you to set the strategy for your organization. So as you get in and you understand, all of that, you need to come up with at the end of the 100 days, here's where I'm at. Here's where here's what I've observed. Here are the things I'm going to do. And here's my strategy, for my organization. So kind of setting up your strategy or your agenda, right? And those should be in your 100-day plan. And so as you're doing all of that, you're building trust, you're building confidence, kind of in the leaders that are around you. So have a 100-day plan, and begin to execute it, and put those 4 categories in place and figure out what you need to do in each of those categories. And that's your first 100 days. But guess what? There's a second 100 days and a third 100 days. So another best practice is to take that and create the second 100 days from it and the third 100 days, and then you'll get your first year. And you will have made significant inroads into building confidence in yourself, confidence in your leaders, and confidence in your team. The other thing I will tell you is this idea that, look for those dissenting opinions in the room. Right. We all talk about having active listening, all that kind of stuff, but have the open door, look for the dissenting opinion in the room, and reach it and making sure that you get it. Because there's things that the unsaid, right? Look for the unsaid, right? And that's essential to being effective as a leader, is looking for the unsaid and trying to get it said so that you can understand and address it. A good leader, a former CEO of mine, and we were talking about, one of these, leaders of a college and University where there was going on, harassment, of some of the students. And, both he and I, daughters, attended this university. And, we were shocked and saying, how did the leader not know? Right? How can you not know that's going on in your universe? That's because you don't have your antenna up and you're looking into the dirt and you're believing, you're in this cognitive dissonance where you believe the BS that's being told to you. That to me is a leader's problem, right? You have to have your antenna up. You've got to go look for the unsaid, and deal with it, because it's there. And so, as I was thinking about this, we said, every leader needs to have their antenna up and go and see. Otherwise, you're living in cognitive dissonance, and that's going to not help you in any way. And I think if you have your antenna up, that's another way of generating trust, right? Because you're going and seeing, and you're walking in the hills of your people, and you're asking the question, you're asking for the unsaid. Then people, this person really cares. And that's how you demonstrate care, right? Is by asking for that unsaid. And that's, there's no better hallmark for a leader than somebody to ask for the unsaid and then do something about it, right? And so, of course, that's the last thing I'll say is, obviously as a leader, to get trust with folks, is do what you say. Get her done. Yeah. Put your thoughts and deeds into action. Follow up. One of the things I do, and I love doing this, and we call it Coffee and Connects in my current role. I go and meet with, a random, probably 15 to 20 people every 30 days. And there it's all randomized, and they show up. We do it in Zoom, and thank God for this new technology. We can actually go and see many people. You can actually touch and talk to everybody in your organization. If you have 1,000 people, 2,000, whatever, you can make a room for this. And do these coffee and connects is what I call them. And in those coffee and connects, it's very simple. They just introduce themselves. Then I ask them, 5 simple questions. What's going well? How do you feel? What could be improved? What's on your wish list, and what keeps you up at night? And they just tell me, and I say, and you hear the unsaid, oh, well, this doesn't work over here, or I can't get this done, and whatever. And I found out through these coffee and connects that, there's people who've been in our company 20 years and have never had a conversation with a senior leader, right? And they tell me that. And you say, because I asked them what's going well. They said, well, number one, I've been here 20 years and I've never talked to a senior leader. And I'm like, that's unfortunate. Well, I'm here. Talk to me. And they love it. And so I encourage you as a leader, if you want to build trust, confidence, be vulnerable, have those coffee and connects within every level in your organization and hear what's going on. That's part of the gimbal walk. That's part of getting your antenna up. That's part of really being that great tactical leader.
I love how you're able to take these hard to do things, no doubt, but into simple actionable steps. So you've got, a relatively clear North Star to go toward. One of the things I think, and I've got a pretty good idea of your brand based on what you just shared. So, it's not something we're necessarily taught growing up in technical school, right? And I think we all have a brand, whether we know it or not. And it seems like you're a little bit more intentional about it. And so how did that come about for you? And what's advice to technical leaders about their brand?
There's a book called, it's by Harvey Coleman, and it's called The Secrets of the Organizational Game Revealed. I'm not a big believer in everything that he says, so I'll put this disclaimer out there. But there's one part of his theory, which is called PI, and it's performance, image, exposure. And, performance is, kind of what you do and how you're ranked and graded, that kind of stuff. Image is what you cultivate, right? And exposure is what you get, right? And you realize through your entire career that the percentage that matters of each of those changes over time. When you're a new hire, it's 50% performance. You're brand new, you're, out of college, whatever. You got to get her done, right? You got to start to demonstrate that, I can learn and I can get stuff done. The image that you cultivate is probably smaller than, maybe it's 50% image, 50% performance. Maybe it's 40% image, because you're building your image, and 10% exposure because you're not going to get a lot of exposure. But as you mature in life, and as you mature in your organization, as you mature in your career, that percentage changes dramatically. It becomes actually, in your later stages, it's 10% performance. It's a given that you can do the work, right? Because you've been around, you've been da-da-da. So you're not gonna blow anybody away by performance. It's really the image that you cultivate now becomes, it says 10% image, 10% performance, maybe 30 to 40% image, and then, the 60 to 50% exposure. So what happens is that your performance is a given. You got to meet that bar. And then it's the image that you cultivate. What are you known for? What are people saying about you, right? Is what's being said about you is what you want on the Wall Street Journal. It's like the famous Wall Street test, right? If somebody were to write a story about you and about what you represent, is that what you want? And if that's not what you want, change it, right? Because that's what matters, is the image that you cultivate, because that image that you cultivate will be what leads you to exposure, right? Because that's what's said about you when you're not in the room. That's how you get that next role, because they're not talking to you about the next role. They're talking to their leaders about the next role. And so that exposure, based upon the image you cultivate, is going to lead to your next role, whatever it is, right? And if that exposure, if you don't know what's being said about you, outside of the room or inside the room, that you're not there, then you'll never be successful. So the idea is to really look at this pie model and making sure that the two things that you can control, performance and image, and then that leads to the third thing that you can't control is what's being said about you. So you want to make sure that that is as positive as possible so that you get that opportunity, you get that role, you get that project, you get referred to another company, whatever it is. Those all things are done by performance and image.
Awesome. We'll make sure to have a link to the book in the show notes too, with the caveat that as much as Earl agrees with the pie framework, it's not everything from the outside.
Yes.
You mentioned brand. The other thing you mentioned is building a strategy 100 days in. And 100 days can fly by really fast. And, for the word strategy almost by itself carries some weight, and it's not easy to do. What are some things that you look back when you are drafting your strategy that tells you whether it's world class or maybe you could do better? Do you have like a framework or something you go based on to determine what's a good strategy and something that you really feel conviction and pride about?
Yes, I've done something actually multiple times, and I love this notion called visual strategy. And there's a group actually, I'll mention them here. They're called group partners. And there's other people who do the same work, but they do a great job of creating this visual strategy. And I think the things that I do to really help create a great strategy is, as you build that, your 100-day plan and you're coming up with your strategy, the first thing you have to do is recognize what the existing strategy is. I mean, there's something going on, right? So look at that existing strategy, and understand, what's going on with it. The second thing is ask, right? And so what I often do is I go out and, I use those same, 5 questions: what's going well, what could be improved, how do you feel, et cetera. And I ask that of the entire organization, of, the top let's say the top 300 leaders or whatever it is, but pick your audience outside of your company, outside of your function, and ask your customers, what's going well, what could be improved, what keeps them up at night, what's on their wish list. You can ask them those questions and they will give you some great feedback. The third thing is look up and out, right? And so that means go look at your competitors, people you admire, the industries that you want to, represent, or, compete in, look at the analysts, et cetera. So go outside, do that your thing. And so I call part of this process is divergent thinking. So part of your divergent thinking to consider all of the inputs is, look outside to your peer group and to those people, the companies you admire, either in your industry or outside. Look inside, ask those 5 thoughtful questions of your leaders and get insight from there, including your employees. And then look at what, been built in the past, because I want you to respect the past and honor the past while you're building for the future. I mean, I don't think it's ever a good idea to throw away the past, right? Because if you do that, then you're going to lose trust, and people are going to say, well, wait a minute, we were here and doing something before you got here. So, recognize what that is and honor it. You may disagree with it, but honor it. Honor it by showing it interest and understanding what it is, so you can make the right builds and shifts. Because you're going to build on some things, because not everything is bad, right? So there's some things you can build on, and there's some shifts you need to make. So do your builds and shifts, knowing what your starting point is. And as you try to identify what those builds and shifts are, that's where you use your assessment and stuff from your employees and from your business colleagues and the third party outsiders. If you bring all that to bear, that's your divergent, then you converge, on what you think the right course of action is for the moment. The other thing is, and we talk about strategy and this notion, what matters more, strategy or culture, right? Strategy is how things get done or what to do. Culture is how you do it, right? So you need both. So I think when you're building your strategy, you also need to understand what culture that you want to create, right? And that culture that you want to create is going to actually be the only thing that helps you execute your strategy. I often say culture is what happens when leaders are out of the room. So, if you really want, things to go the way that you want them to go, you got to build that right culture, get people bought into it, because that's what's going to sustain and execute your strategy. Because without the right culture, your strategy will fail.
In terms of culture, they're different for every organization, and it's not really a right or wrong thing. I think maybe it's similar to brand, where every organization has a culture. Some are intentional about it, and some are able to operationalize it really well. So when you come into an organization, the level at which their culture is operating may be high or low. If you had to kind of turn up the gears or shift the culture around, how do you go about doing that? It feels like playing a game of Jenga a little bit.
It is. And I think that there's a couple things you can do. Number one is this idea of called, and I love this philosophy because I'm, as a geek and that kind of stuff, this idea about hacking, right? You can do culture hacks, right? You're just small incremental changes, right? It's little acts of culture, right? The little acts of inclusion and, these little acts, which can lead to big outcomes. And so think about how you might hack the culture, right? You're not going to, move this, ship all at once, but you can do these little hacks. And so think about, what culture hacks do you want to create? Whether it's embedding some agile principles in, whether it's about my coffee and connect meetings, those are all culture hacks, right? And so you can do these culture hacks and you can move the organization by hacking it. And I think everything's hackable, by the way, right? And so you can have a hackathon and say, okay, here are the 3 things we're going to go do, and figure out what those 3 things are. But, create your culture hacks and then follow through. I think that's number one. Number 2 is this idea about there is a way of codifying it. And again, looking at cultures that you've going and seeing and figuring out, how to build and emulate those cultures. Because there's things that you may love about Amazon, or you love about Disney, or, whatever, or Apple. I think that there's some great cultures out there because, we've been around for, millions of years, right? And so, none of this is new, right? So go out and find out those things that you like. You may get it from multiple parties, and then, tailor it for you and your organization and your need, and then begin doing the hacks. So, go out and look and see, find those things that are cool, and then create your hacks, implement your hacks. And the third thing I would say is be, thinking long-term, because culture doesn't change quickly. Identify what you'd like, put the hacks in place, and be patient.
And you are certainly part of 2 very strong cultures, I would assume, both being in the military as well as playing Division I football. And so has some of that stuff permeated into your leadership style and driving culture now?
Oh, for sure it has. I mentioned the 2 learnings I got from the military, and this idea about, trying to be that 360 leader and making sure that I take care of soldiers. And that, so that permeates me today. I would say there's 2 other things that I got from the military and playing football, and this notion of, I would say, doing more in the morning than most people do all day. Right. That's the Army commercial. Right. And so there's 2 commercials. And I remember sitting there with the FORSCOM general. He was our FORSCOM general who was in charge of the forces in the U.S. And he sat there when we were graduating West Point, and that guy said, he said, you remember, soldiers are in your charge because of 2 reasons. Number 1 is do more in the morning than most people do all day. They want to be busy. They want to be engaged. They want to, get things done. They're not there to, sit around. And the second thing is so that they can be all that they can be. Right. And this idea about, being all that you can be, and really building, people come to the military, want to build a skill, want to build a capability. Some want to build a career, and your culture that you instantiate needs to accomplish those two things, right? Making sure that they're busy and active and engaged, and making sure that you're challenging them to be all that they can be. That's what I got from whether you're playing football, you're acting, you're doing exercises, and you're practicing. All that is about being active, and then you're hoping to maximize your individual capability, and be successful in whatever venture you take. And so that to me is kind of what drives me. And I think about this, and part of what we do now is I've started to understand and focus on what my life's purpose is. And I've done some reflection and things like that. And my purpose is that building a world without limits so that people can be all that they can be and deliver some magic all along the way. And as I talk through you and through this conversation that we've had, building is something I do all the time, right? Whether I'm building cardboard boxes or robots or things like that. And I want to build this world such that there are no limits. I've talked about being a no limit soldier and how my grandfather lifted my limits, so people can be all that they can be, which is my military, thing, such that, I'm looking to try to help you and others be the very best versions of themselves. And if we do that, if we are the very best versions of ourselves and we live in a world without limits and we're building, we will create some magic. I'm often thinking about the quote that advanced technology should be indistinguishable from magic, right? And if we're really, being all that we can be, and there are no limits, the technology that we deploy to our companies or to our individual selves will be magical. Our experiences with them will be magical, and we will create magic not only for ourselves, but for those around us. And that to me is my life's purpose. And for those listeners, if there's any way for me to help you, lift your limits, change the story that you tell yourself, help you create some magic. I'd love to help.
Speaking of advanced technology and magic, I'm going to shoot a tangent out to this new wave of artificial intelligence, LLMs, generative AI. I'm sure this is something you're tracking at a super high priority in your role. There's a lot of applications in engines, in manufacturing, a lot of things that Cummins does. What are you really excited about? Where do you see the use cases in the industrial sector?
Oh, that's a great question. And, if we think about magic and we're thinking about, advanced technology being indistinguishable from magic, we're in this magical age, right? Where AI and generative AI has the ability for us to really create some magic. And the way that I think about generative AI is this, and I'll start off with this story. If you remember, and I think it's Terminator, A Rise of the Machines, I think it's Terminator 3, where the John Connor character at the end is going to go try to destroy Skynet and stop Judgment Day. And so, I think he's headed into a bunker somewhere, probably in Arizona. And he goes into this bunker and he's got his, munitions, and he's going to try to stop Judgment Day. Right. And so he goes into this old bunker and he walks in, and there are these old computer tapes and, paper tapes and punch cards and, and you look at this thing and he looks at it and he realizes, this is not Skynet, but then he also comes to the realization that maybe I'm not meant to stop Judgment Day. I'm meant to survive it. Right. And that's the way I think about AI. We're not going to stop AI. And I don't think we need to merely survive it. I think we need to thrive with AI, right? And so my philosophy is how do humans thrive with AI, right? And so I'm thinking about a thrival guide. So how do we create the AI thrival guide? And so for my company, what I'm thinking about is collaborative AI versus only replacement AI. A lot of people are scared of the replacement AI, and there will be some. As we look at various economies, and let's think about, from the ag economy to the industrial economy, to the information economy, to the digital economy, to the AI economy. Each of those economies has associated with the reduction of labor associated with the previous economy. So we were ag to industrial. So when we went to industrial, we didn't need as many farmers as we had, right? But at the same time, we needed more industrialists. And so my prediction is, yes, the previous economy, the labor associated with that previous economy will be reduced. That's been true ever since we've been on this planet. So, but what's also been true is that if you look at the statistics, really effective unemployment rate, even despite technological change and industrial growth and population growth, the unemployment rate stays relatively constant, right, over the long run. So, if you see, we're getting to 8 to 10 billion people on the planet with urbanization and those kinds of things, this threat of AI, really, having a dramatic increase in unemployment, I think is unfounded, right? And if you read Andy McAfee's Second Machine Age, I think it says the same thing. And so at first I want to quiet the fears of everyone. And so when I think about AI, I think about more collaborative AI than replacement AI. And if you look at collaborative AI as an opportunity, then I believe you can start to think about exponential human beings, right? And so to me, humans plus AI equals exponential humans, right? We can be exponential and have exponential outcomes, exponential good, exponential growth, exponential knowledge, all through the use of AI. And so to me, AI is about, really expanding the capability of humans, not replacing the capability of humans. And so this is about being exponential. So to me, this story and journey about exponential humans is absolutely essential. And if we accept that we're going to be exponential with AI, then we also need to address the ills of AI, which is, it can be wrong, it can hallucinate, it can use copyrighted materials, it can be biased. Those are all the ills. But I think but the ultimate cure to those ills is a human in the loop, right? And so we're going to be exponential with AI, but we're essential to being exponential with AI because we're the only people who can cure the ills of AI. Humans. That's the domain of humans, is to cure the ills of AI. And so you have a role. You're absolutely essential in curing the ills of AI, right? Because you're the one who can make the choice about whether to use what the AI produces or not, right? And so to me, that's the other thing, is the AI is like a hammer, right? It's a tool, right? And so a hammer can either build a house or it can destroy one. You pick. The hammer in and of itself didn't either build or destroy. It was you, the wielder of the hammer, who built or destroyed. So the same thing with AI. You can build with AI or you can destroy with it. And so to me, that's why humans are essential. That's how we become exponential. That's why it's absolutely necessary to have a human in the loop. And that's what I have in my company, is really kind of mandating a human in the loop. And this is what I'm, looking forward in my company as well. Is number one is this idea of a co-pilot, coach, or assistant coach, right? Because that's really going to help us be essential. And I think it's going to be role-based, right? So this idea about everyone has their own co-pilot. The CEO will have a co-pilot. The field supervisor will have a co-pilot. The cook will have a co-pilot. Everyone has a co-pilot that's trained for their role and gives them advice and guidance to help them perform the role exponentially. So that's how we're going to create exponential humans, with role-based coaches, right? Whether you use the word co-pilot, coach, or assistant coach, all of those things apply to help you be the best version of yourself. So that's the first use case. The second use case is, as we think about AI in an industrial company, it'll be about AI-led design, right? So we've done a lot of analyst-led design, ALD. We're going to be pivoting and leveraging and going to AILD and using AI to do some design work, whether we're designing a supply network, a factory, a line in a factory, or a product. We're going to be able to use AI to help us run through simulations on how effective that network will be. The third use case will be around about hardware and software productivity. There's lots of cases on that, where they were using hardware and software engineer productivity. And we've heard all the things, about 40%, 20%, whatever it is for coding, those kinds of things, or for product design work. And so all that stuff will be accelerated by AI. The fourth use case is intelligent summarization. So we're using AI it's now becoming commonplace, right? To turn AI on in a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting or whatever. Just use it. That way you can be focused on the meeting and then let the AI be your note taker. What a fantastic use. And then lastly, I think we're going to use AI. The last use case is changing the way that companies interact with their customers. So we all have for knowledge management, right? And so, you're always asking, questions about how something can be repaired or whatever it is. And people have to go to page 1075 of the manual, that now goes away. I can now make the manual ultimately interpretable by having a natural language interface to a dense set of text to bring you a specific solution to your problem. That, changes the nature of things. And so I think, generative AI and AI in general will help us be exponential and will enable these use cases.
I'm going to take us back to a second element of the culture conversation that I got here. And this is something that I know is near and dear to you, which is DEIB. And a strong culture, in my opinion, and I think yours too, has to have a solid foundation of people and diversity and an environment in which they can thrive. And within there, you've mentioned this term dancers. So bring us there however you'd like, but please talk a little bit more about the number of dancers you want to cultivate on your team and what that all means.
Well, I love it. Yeah. And DEI and B, and, we call it diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I think an effective, program actually creates belonging. And when we think about belonging and the ultimate dividend of an effective DEI program is everyone feels that they belong, right? And each of us, no matter where you are in this world or whatever you've been doing, you've been in a position where you felt you didn't belong. And when that happened to you, what did you do? You're like, I'm not staying. I'm only going to do what's compliant. I'm not going to give you any extra effort. If I don't feel I don't belong, you're not going to get any of my discretionary effort. And I'm going to try to get out of here as soon as possible, doing as little as possible. And so that's what happens when you in an environment where you feel like you don't belong. My belief is that I want everyone to feel as though they belong. And when we talk about dancing and I use this, kind of story to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and that diversity is being invited to the dance, right? You get invited, right? Equity is having access to the dance floor so you can get on the dance floor and, irrespective of your capabilities, you get access to that dance floor. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Right. But belonging is wanting to dance as if no one's looking at you. Right. And so this idea of creating a world of a bunch of dancers is, to me, this idea of having a world full of people dancing as if no one's looking at them. So they're all doing their own thing. They have their music and they're beating their own head and they're enjoying themselves to the fullest. Right. Because nobody's looking at them. And they're, and that's what I've tried to create my organization, is an organization that's full of people dancing as if no one's looking at them. Because if I've got that, I know that you feel like you belong. And we've all seen a person who really shouldn't be dancing, but they're having the best time and they're full of energy, and you know that you're going to get 100% of their attention. And you're going to get that discretionary effort because if I get your discretionary effort, that's the realm of magic, right? That's where magic happens, right? Is when I've got your discretionary effort and, and you put that effort into whatever you're doing. That's when you're going to, hit the 360-yard home run, or you're going to run the sub 3.5 minute mile, or you're going to, that's the flow, that's the zone, right? I want people in the zone. And as an athlete, when people are in the zone, they're capable of such amazing things, right? They surprise themselves, as a matter of fact, about what you're capable of. And so when you're dancing, if no one's looking at you, you're going to be capable of amazing stuff and of creating magic for not only yourself, but for those around you, those people you serve, the company you keep, the family you raise, all of that ends up being magical when you're dancing as if no one's looking at you.
I love that so much. And you're a DJ, so having people feel invited to dance and wanting them to really feel like they want to dance is something that you bring out over there as well, I bet.
Oh yeah, I'm a closet DJ. I'm glad you bring that up. And so, the idea about DJE is my DJ name. Right? The power of a DJ is when you can move the crowd, right? And I think that's the power of leaders too, right? Is when you move the crowd. And so, you learn. You watch the crowd. The best DJs I know play for the crowd, not for themselves, because you're playing for yourself. Then everybody's like, what is that DJ doing? No, the best DJs is when the DJs, see the crowd and can move the crowd. It's funny because last night we had an event at the company, and I was allowed to DJ at the company, and I moved the crowd. So, I love it. I mean, that is my happy place, is when I'm moving the crowd.
That's awesome. And speaking of not for yourself, you are on a number of boards, including on the board of Life Remodeled, alongside our good friend Chris Lambert. And so this is something that some executives, I find, do take the time to do, and not everyone does. Maybe tell me a little bit more about your motivation there.
So Michael Smith and Janet Sherlock. So Michael Smith, the CIO of Estee Lauder, Janet Sherlock, the CIO of Ralph Lauren, and a few others were getting together to figure out, in the height of COVID, I think it was 21 or so, they were getting together to try to figure out, maybe it was 2020, but they were getting together to figure out what IT can do to respond to the COVID crisis and the healthcare crisis. And as they got together, their first meeting was a week after the George Floyd murder. Janet raised this question that said, I really can't talk about the healthcare crisis. I need to talk about social injustice. She asked that question to Michael Smith and those who were around her. And Michael thought, we need to figure out what we can do. And so Michael reached out to me and, said, would you like to, join me in figuring out what IT can do to respond to social injustice? It's not where you stand in the moments of comfort and convenience. It's where you stand in the moments of controversy, trials and controversy. That's the true measure of a person. And that's, Martin Luther King's quote. And Michael kind of takes stands, and I love him for that. And so he reached out to me and asked me would I stand with him, and I'm happy to do it. And so through that connection, we formed what we call the Tech Pack. And the Tech Pack really is an organization that has a vision where we see anybody who has a passion for technology ought to have the ability to succeed. And that's what we want. We want to roll it. And where we're going to do that is through a 2-factor mission statement. One is to reduce the digital divide in some meaningful way over this decade, as well as increase the representation of underrepresented communities within the technology sector. That's our vision. Anybody with a passion has the ability to succeed. And we want to do that through, again, addressing the digital divide and increasing the representation of underrepresented people. We want to call people to action. We have 3 levers. One's the membership lever, which we ask you to take the pledge. And, I invite anybody who's watching this to go to www.techpack.org and take the pledge. Then spread it to your network, get others, to take the pledge with you who are interested in this great work, and then start living the pledge, which is what I call the +1. And +1 is very simple. It just says add 1 to something that you do every day on some regular basis, right? Read a book you wouldn't otherwise read, listen to a song you wouldn't otherwise listen to, read a poem that you wouldn't otherwise read, take someone to lunch that you wouldn't otherwise take to lunch, work with a supplier that you wouldn't otherwise work with. And we believe through the power of the plus one, if each of us does that, right, our network effect can be a force multiplier to achieving our mission and vision. That's the membership lever. And I encourage any people who watch this to, take the pledge and activate that membership lever. The second lever is what I call the partnership lever, which allows for us to fill the gaps, right? Or connect the dots. And so there's a lot of people doing great work and trying to create talent. And so we can, IT leaders, and this is my challenge to IT leaders. You can fill the gap for those organizations with your time, talent, and treasure. Loan your time to them. I'm doing that with Life Remodeled. Loan your treasure, donate and support them. Give them your talent and performing some particular role. Everyone can do one of those three, right? Or all three, right? And I'm doing that with Life Remodeled, and I love that. The second thing we want to do is what we call connect the dots, right? And connect the dots is while they produce these great outcomes, and Life Remodel is doing some great work. We can use the resources that they create in our roles, and by giving either jobs, co-ops, externships, you name it. And so let's bring that pull, and bring those resources to bear in our organizations. And so I challenge you to either fill the gaps or connect the dots through these great resources that people create. And lastly, the storytelling lever. And I'm doing that here and other places. And so tell your story, right? And you can tell your story, through a podcast like this. You can tell your story. We do podcasts as well at TechPack. We can do written reports, et cetera. So there's lots of ways to tell your story, participate in the panel. And so those are things that the TechPack is all about. Again, so, check out TechPack, look at, pushing those three levers, whether it's the membership lever, the partnership lever, the storytelling lever, and make a difference in this world. And so, I'm doing that with the TechPack. I try to do it with Life Remodel. And all that comes from, in a certain point in your life, you move from what I call the get side of life to the give side of life, right? A lot of us work a lot getting, right? But eventually you got to pivot. And I'm at that point in my life and happy to do it. And so happy to get to the give side and use my time, talent, treasure to make a difference for somebody in their lives.
And to confirm the spelling there for, I'm sure a lot of folks will want to check it out. It's techpact.org, TECHPACT.org, right?
Yep, that's it. Perfect.
Cool. We'll make sure to have that in the show notes as well. Well, Earl, first of all, I should have mentioned earlier, appreciate your service in the military. Also appreciate all the work that you do in the community. And also personally, you've been great source of direction, clarity, encouragement, support for young entrepreneurs like myself as well. And I appreciate that. One last question for you, a little bit more of a fun question maybe that I like to ask all my guests. So what's something recently, a product or a service that you got to experience, whether at home, at work, that just kind of blew your socks off, that really delighted you, that made you feel really good?
The product or experience that I think is really super awesome. And I'll give my wife credit for this one, and I actually invite you guys to go check out her business. She's a lawyer by day and a yarn shop owner by night, and so she owns and operates a yarn shop. It's called Parker Avenue Knits, right? And you can follow her on IG and Parker Avenue Knits. .com, and I think it's www.parkeravenue.knits.com. And she has been on this journey for a couple of years now. And, it's an amazing, journey for her in that, there were 4 ladies who were helping her create this yarn shop, and all 4 of them are cancer survivors. And the knitting community, and to watch it and to see how the knitting community has gone from this retail, sort of shop that's cool and funky in Detroit, and invite people to go see it. But what it represents is a haven for, cancer survivors, for, they call it knit therapy or art therapy. And, and this notion that you can have a great therapeutic, kind of result from something as simple as knitting is fantastic. And in fact, you called me out as a DJ. I actually have my DJ gear at the shop. So we're the only shop in Detroit, Michigan that has a DJ booth. And so, that to me, just walking in and just seeing the people and seeing the experience and the people who walk in and know her and celebrate her and celebrate what she's done. It's quite rewarding.
And so Parker Avenue Knits on Franklin Street, east side of Detroit, downtown. And if you're lucky, you might get a chance to watch DJ E or DJ Immortal there as well.
Awesome. Friday night.
Earl,
all right.
Friday nights. All right. I might swing by myself. Earl, thank you so much for making the time, man. This was a super fun chat. I have learned so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Ashok. And we didn't get to talk about it, but I will say, I am a hardcore, Cowboys fan, but I am loving the Lions and what they're doing. And I hope next time we do kick the field goal.
That's a debate we might have to have another episode on. We'll see you next time, folks.
See you. Ciao.
After having a chance to listen to that recording with Earl, there were three things that I especially wanted to talk about more. Three things that I wish someone had told me earlier in my career or when I was younger. The first is around believing in oneself. The second is around storytelling. And the third is around the benefits of volunteering. Around believing in oneself, I think we're especially susceptible to this as folks who work in the scientific fields. On the one hand, I agree with Earl completely. And he echoes some of the best advice that a mentor gave me once, which is the reason that you do not achieve what you want to achieve is because of the story that you tell yourself about why it's not possible. And then, of course, it has a tendency to become self-fulfilling. On the other hand, I can assume that if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably nerds for the scientific method and the falsification framework, where we run experiments to try and invalidate or disprove our ideas, instincts, or hypotheses versus proving them and validating them, which I also agree with, even though it might be slightly contradictory. I think both can be true depending on how you're applying them. And us humans are beautifully complicated. And overall, while it's definitely important to prioritize those riskiest assumptions and applying that experimentation mindset to disproving them, it's also extremely important, especially from a personal standpoint, to be optimistic. Think about the stories that you tell yourself about why things will work. And I think that balance of having both will help bridge a strong operational mindset to get things done in the most de-risked ways, and also to dream optimistically so we can identify new problems to solve or new ways of solving important problems around us. The second one's around storytelling. When I transitioned out of being a software engineer and writing code every day into roles like product management, sales engineering, and enterprise sales, I was very lucky to have great mentors, coaches, and training around me. One thing that I think around storytelling that is a trend across all of the mentorship and training is that my stream of consciousness as an extrovert is not super interesting. It's kind of boring compared to if I can be more intentional around my communication. Some of the books like The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell and Spin Selling by Neil Rackham were really helpful for me. And in both of those books, one common thing that will resonate with product folks is our adage around fall in love with the problem, not with the solution. I think it's also the same reason why in movies and fictional books, there's so much character development around the problem or maybe the villain that the hero comes in and conquers at the end. It's why the best product pitches and demos emphasize the problem in the industry or to the customer base and the implications of those problems before showing you the shiny product. I think it's also why our user stories as product managers have a "so that" section. So it helps us remember why we're building this in the first place. And I know that that's a section that y'all skip a lot in writing your stories. And I know that because until I thought about it this way, I did too. So the next time you're writing an important email, a product brief, or a PRD, think about the sequence in which you're communicating the facts and see if you can reorder it into telling a good story about it. I've also heard from parents that it's really good advice for parenting to tell your kids stories instead of maybe nagging them with the facts. So remember that facts tell and stories sell. And thirdly, on volunteering, I personally have gotten to solve way more challenging problems, learn at a much faster rate, and get to meet people I would otherwise have no business meeting because I volunteer consistently. When I was a kid, my parents would drag me out of home to temple to volunteer. And I was that bratty kid who would do it, but only do it begrudgingly and make a big fuss about it until I got there and started doing the work. And I found myself really enjoying it. I believe in the value of volunteering so much that our company Integral had 2 paid volunteer days for our integers. And I think it was additionally beneficial for us as a consulting business and a services business where it attracted folks who valued acting in service of others, which I think we saw a big correlation with the folks who did better as consultants. As a side benefit, I find that on a more personal level, that it's an opportunity for us knowledge workers to see ways in which we can add value without having to just make good decisions. Of course, it depends on what you're volunteering. I found myself tying my identity to the quality of decisions I made a lot. And doing that at an extreme level can be harmful, and it was for myself. And so when I spent time helping repaint a school or sanitizing clipboards when the COVID vaccines were being rolled out, I found these super helpful for myself as ways that I could add value to the community and make the world a better place without just my ability to make good, hard decisions. So hopefully y'all will take a moment to think about the stories you tell yourselves and the belief you have in yourself, the power of storytelling, and the way that you communicate, and see if there's a way that is adjacent to your skills or your interests and your passions that you can volunteer in your community over the next few months. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found the show interesting and educational and hopefully even entertaining. I have loved the feedback, suggestions, and encouragement that I'm getting in the comments as well as in the DMs y'all are sending me. So please keep those coming. I love thinking about them in terms of how we might iterate on improving the show. Thank you for joining me on the Convergence Podcast today. Subscribe to the Convergence Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your content. If you're listening and found this helpful, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and tell me what you think about what you heard today.